Welcome to the latest word on Black News with Brittany Jones, bringing you powerful conversations.
Black history is American history. American history is Black history. You don't study the history of America like history is a public relations exercise.
Exclusive stories.
That Black women in slavery, it's kind of like our bodies have never been our own. So you start to hear these stories, and these were stories about young women. They were not adults that was brutally raped.
Thought-provoking topics.
It's the voice of Black America right now, and it feels more like a choir than a preacher. And it's a choir that's singing on different notes, not a choir that's singing in harmony.
And transformative perspectives.
I have learned so much about myself.
Haven't we all?
That inform, inspire, and ignite change. You're watching the latest word on Black News. Welcome back to the latest word on Black News. I'm your host, Brittany Jones. So good to be here with you folks. Well, we are really witnessing a movement towards censorship, from the Trump administration's restrictions on free speech to the banning of books that challenges America's controversial history. The Trump administration has frequently used the term illegal DEI, and Education Secretary Linda McMahon faced intense questioning about this term during her recent testimony on Capitol Hill. Let's take a listen.
I have a few other examples that I would like your thoughts on, simple yes or no. If this is illegal DEI, an example, would you say that it would be an illegal DEI for a lesson plan on the Tulsa Race Massacre?
I'd have to get back to you on that.
Do you know what the Tulsa Race Massacre is?
I'd like to look into it more and get back to you on it.
Okay, so I look forward to that. How about the book Through My Eyes by Ruby Bridges, for instance?
I haven't read that.
Have you learned about Ruby Bridges?
If you have specific examples you'd like to
That was a
provide,
specific example.
I'll be very happy.
It was an incredibly specific example. I named a specific
questions, and I will look into it and get back to you on it.
Joining me now is Rodney Freeman, director of Reminisce Preservation and producer of the upcoming documentary, Are You a Librarian? The Untold Story of Black Librarians. Rodney, welcome to the latest word.
Thank you so much for having me on here.
We're excited to have you too, and really to get you to weigh in, because think about what we just heard, right? So Secretary McMahon responses regarding historical events involving Ruby Bridges and the Tulsa Race Massacre were very telling, and really, some would say, ignorant, just blatantly. That's how people would describe it, right? And some, would say, did she even know what she was talking about? Which goes to show you the importance of Black librarians when it comes to history. What are your thoughts about the responses and on all of that?
For someone to say that, I have to get back to you about Ruby Bridges.
Yeah, that part.
It still leaves me speechless, right? Because this is something that now you're making it seem like, well, okay, I need to go and check and see if that is, illegal because it has something. It kind of, and I hate to say this, but it's like a cover when somebody says DEI. It's like, well, let's ban anything Black, or brown, or other, or whatever you want to call it. But that's one of the things about with librarians. We want to make sure that you have the information to make your own judgment, your own decisions. And make sure you're able to access it.
That is so good, because we've been talking about this erasure of our history for the last few weeks. And, from Mark Moria from the Urban League that we had on talking about it. And really, we asked a question to people about why is the Trump administration so offended by Black history? What's your thoughts on that?
Because it's powerful. And once you start teaching Black history, again, go back to 1619. Once you start opening up the doors and actually teaching our history, you start looking at America side eye, like, okay, you're not really what you say you are. Once you start teaching that, it breaks down the status quo.
Secretary McMahon was also asked why DEI would be an important civil rights issue for all students. We're going to play her response and get your response on the other end.
Would you talk more about why DEI is an important civil rights issue for all students?
Well, unfortunately, many of the programs of DEI did more. I mean, the title was Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And it did more, I think, to separate and to provide more segregation ideas because it pitted an oppressor versus oppressed ideology. Many students were taught that if you're white, you're privileged. If you're not, you should not bring that privileged group as part of what you're doing. That is exactly contrary to, I think, everything we've been trying to accomplish in our country over the years so that everyone really has equal access, equal opportunity under the law.
Listening to that, let's really take a moment to unpack this, right, Rodney? So Secretary McMahon claims DEI creates division, yet as we've already established, equal access has historically required active efforts to include previously marginalized voices. Do you see the contradiction here?
Yes. Of course. I mean, there's a blatant contradiction, and it really started with, us teaching the history accurately about slavery, about white privilege, and some people got upset that we were putting it out there. And just to the 1619 project, I think that really sparked a lot of animosity because, oh, wait, we're now teaching, what America is actually founded on. And we're now
Mm-hmm.
teaching that, yes, all the systems since slavery has systematic, you know, embedded systematic racism in it. And, we have to acknowledge that if we want to move past it. And that's the thing about it. Nobody wants to acknowledge that. And, they don't want to put that on them. Meaning, the people who are fighting against, DEI. They don't want to claim that because if you have to, once you start claiming it, once you name it and claim it, then you actually have to do something about it. And they don't want to do anything about it because they like it the way it is because it does give them that privilege. So yeah.
Think about the truth and the way that, history tells itself and looking at how many books are out there that's basically focused on making sure that we know our history. Does that really have anything to do with DEI? Or it really just has to do with it's our history over the entire country?
So does it have to do with DEI directly? No, it doesn't. It is basically simple history. What happens is that when people start bringing things in and saying, well, case in point, when I was going through school back in the late 80s, early 90s, and you were
Mm-hmm.
being taught one history and this is how it is, and this was a revolution, this is how it is. That's it, right? And so now that you have all these other materials that can come in and like, refute that and say, well, no, actually, this is what happened. Is not is bringing that diversity of narratives into the table to say, hey, people are looking at this. Let's just take the revolution. We're looking at the revolution from different angles now. And that is a threat to the main narrative of, hey, white people founded this and white people are the ones that built it. And it's like, no, there were other people at the table that built this nation as well. So yeah, that I understand why they're attacking DEI so much and they're attacking, Black history because it goes direct to the opposite of what they're fighting for, and that is basically to maintain the status quo.
You have been working to change the narrative by telling your own stories, and you're doing that by documentary. So let's talk about that a little bit. It's called Are You a Librarian? The Untold Stories of Black Librarians. And I wanted to know what actually inspired you to do this documentary. Is it because of the challenging times that we're in, or what kind of prompted you to say, hey, I need to be able to tell these stories?
Yeah, I started by basically I had left the profession, because I was upset. If people know about the librarian profession, it's very It's only 6% African American. It's 88% white Caucasian. And going through some of the experiences that I've been through, I really just didn't want to have anything else to do with the profession. I was like, I'm gonna do my own thing, build my business. But that kind of turned around when I started to go to the conferences and present as a business owner and show them that, I'm doing this database. But I started to hear from Black librarians about what they're doing in the community, the programs that they're doing, and how they're helping the community. I'm like, well, who's telling that story? Because every time I go to these conferences, every time I look at some of these librarian magazines, I don't see us being represented. And what is the story? Like, do we even have a role in this profession? Have we contributed to this profession? Because when I was going through library school, never heard about some of these big pioneers that actually were creators, inventors, trailblazers, pioneers of community engagement. It was a perfect timing that we come out now with our story and say, hey, Black librarians have a rich history.
Yes.
We are some of the people who, the reason why you have the modern public library system now of going into the library and not just using, books, but using some of the other resources to get help in the community, that was started by Black librarians. The way that you search catalog, you have a Black librarian who opened and expanded that. You have many people who've done great things in this profession who are Black who don't get that recognition, and that's hopefully what this documentary does.
Well, kudos to you for doing that. And I mean, obviously, the point of a documentary is to tell those untold stories. But again, I had never heard about us being really involved in, like you just said, I went to library school. So that was just even amazing to hear, and also probably inspire somebody else. So, what types of surprising stories did you discover about Black librarians while making this documentary?
Oh, it's so many. It's so many that we had to cut out. That's the thing about it, right? Because
Part two.
we part two, right? Part two, and some of the other like shorts. It's so many stories. Again, Thomas Fountain Blue, who was one of the first Black librarians who basically used his library as a community center and said, hey, you don't just have to check out books. You can come in here and have a lecture. You can have a knitting club, organization. You can have presenters come in. You can, get help, community help, because Black people weren't, at that time, Black people weren't allowed to use the white library. And Dorothy Porter, who was the one that helped expand the Dewey Decimal System, the way that we search for books and
Yeah.
access material. Black people were only under two call numbers, and that was colonization and slavery. And she was like, "That's stupid." She was like, I'm going to expand this system," and she did it. Basically, she went against the American Library Association, and she went against some of the other people that told her, don't do that. And she was like, why? For what? I want to make sure that we can be able to find information about ourselves. If I want to find a book of poetry, if I want to find a recipe book, I want to make sure that, people are able to access that information. We talked to Dr. Hayden, and she talks about her what inspired her to be a librarian. Who else we talked to? Tracy Hall, who is a former executive director of American Library Association. We talked to a number of people that these stories, I feel like these stories, when they get out there, people are going to start looking at it and like, you know what? I actually do because when you go to the library, typically you see someone and they might not look like you. But if anything with this documentary that I want to do is be able to people like, look, I see me, I can do this if I want to do this. I
That's right.
belong here in this field. And I have a history. Our people have a history with information. Um, I would have loved to tell the story and connecting it to, Africa, ancient Africa, and the roots of librarianship and cataloging, going back to, ancient Africa. And I would have loved to tell that story, but that's probably part
Yeah.
two. But But there's so many things that we could talk about,
Yeah.
but yeah, that is really, yeah.
It's super inspiring though, because you taking this opportunity to tell that story will highlight what Black librarians have done in history and what is to come in years to come. How do you think that this will help influence the next generation of Black librarians by watching your documentary?
Yeah, and that's one of the things too. So the documentary is really two parts, historical
Okay.
and contemporary. So the whole story, we want to tell the history, and we want to tell the contemporary story of Black librarians and what they're doing now. And there's so many Black librarians that are, out there. They have their own platforms. They're doing story times. I'm thinking of Billy Allen, Mr. Billy, the librarian, who was on the TV show Queer Eye for the Queer Eye. I think the name is Queer Eye. Um, and he was also on some other shows, but he did a story time with the cast of Hamilton, a hip hop story time. There's so many, there's the younger Black librarians are definitely using social media to get out there and, meet people where they're at, and I think that is historically what Black librarians have done because we've had to, if you don't want to come to the library, we'll bring it to you, so if
Yeah.
you're going to be on social media, we're going to be there.
Before we let you go, Rodney, tell us when your documentary is coming out. When is that release date?
So the release date is going to be next year. We
Okay.
are having our first screening, first look, a work in progress screening in 2 weeks at an American Library Association conference. And we after that are going to take it around, screen it, get more feedback, refine it, and then we want to put it out at the top of next year. So
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to add that I didn't ask?
yeah, I will say this that the documentary is really it's a jump on point for people. There's a lot of people who still don't understand or may not know what librarians do. A lot of people still think that librarians they read all day and hey, that must be a good job. But we want people to kind of really just get acquainted with Black librarianship and librarians in general and hopefully start doing their own research and we do want people to hopefully this inspires people to become a librarian or it might inspire them to do their own documentary about librarians because there's so again like I said there's so many stories that we didn't get to tell because you got to keep it within a certain amount and that's one of the things that we're doing with this is that me coming from my librarian background and not really a filmmaker, I wanted to make sure that we people have access to all the other oral histories that are associated with this project that we didn't get to tell. So we're creating a database where people will be able to go in and hear those oral histories. So and the project is much bigger. We also have written a couple of grants to develop a map of a GIS map of segregated and colored libraries to develop a curriculum for Black librarians. So yeah, it's the documentary, but there's other pieces too that we want people to know about for this project.
That's good. So good. We're looking forward to it.
Thank you, and I
Yes,
appreciate
of
this
course.
again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here on The Latest Word. We're excited about your documentary and thank you for really weighing in on this important conversation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And many thanks to Rodney again for joining us here on The Latest Word. You can check out more from Rodney on the Are You a Librarian podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Well, for us, we'll continue to follow up on this very important conversation. But in the meantime, we also want to hear from you on this. What are your thoughts about Secretary McMahon's leadership in the Department of Education after hearing her responses to questions involving our history? Drop your thoughts in the comments below so we can follow up with you on that. But for now, thanks for watching The Latest Word. I'm Brittany Jones, and until next time, take care.